Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us today to stay curious. Look at the special guest we have, astronaut Charlie Walker. Hello, Charlie. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Mark. You?
I'm doing great.
Excellent.
It's been a pleasure to getting to know you. 20 days in space, 3 missions in 1984 and 85. We were looking at one of the early astronauts and the first commercial astronaut. And Charlie, we love our astronauts of the shuttle era because you're around our country, over 300 of you, doing great things to educate kids and adults alike about your missions, but also inspire the next generation. You've been here at Kennedy Space Center for the last 4 days. I know you're worn out. Thank you for taking time to be with us on Stay Curious, but tell us a little bit about your experience this time at Kennedy Space Center.
Oh my gosh, it's basically the same kind of experience that I've had going back the more than almost 20 years that I've been doing this astronaut encounter. In that the public, young and old, parents bringing youngsters in, school classes being brought in, and eyes wide open and sparkling with inquisitiveness, with questions. Yeah, often the same basic questions over again. But I'm intrigued with having the opportunity to rethink my answers to some questions like, well, get the question, how do you go to the bathroom in space?
Mm-hmm.
I summarized that to begin with. The abstract is very carefully. And then I'll go into some cleaned up details, but
Yeah.
but I vary it from time to time, and I've learned to add in some dramatics, some hand flourishes, and some expressions about odors and this, that, and the other thing. So I've learned how to be a little more theatrical and interesting, I think, to the audience in terms of presentation. But the groups, as always, interesting. Of course, there's a filter factor involved. There's the NASA and Delaware North, who manages astronaut encounter in the visitor complex, filtering the school groups. What school group applies, what school group is approved and scheduled in. Certainly, the public, beyond just the school groups, but the public, they pay bucks to come through the door. So they're going to be interested in space almost certainly before they walk through the door. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend the time and the money. So you've got an audience that, for the most part, is interested, and certainly with teachers, they're going to inspire the students, and I'm just there to help continue and satisfy the inspiration and the curiosity that comes from the inspiration that teachers give, and answer questions for the public and hopefully get them interested in looking into space flight, the details, current events, and future opportunities to see launches and space flights and learn about them, to encourage that in people. So it's been that way since the beginning, continues to be that today, and I love it.
Well, you can tell that you love it. Marty, we've been out there a couple times, and I've seen you talk before and this week. He does a great job up there. We wanted to let everybody know how much we care about our shuttle people by putting up our Shuttle Fest logo there. We're going to, every April, celebrate the shuttle era. Hopefully we can work one April to have you involved in there with a bunch of payload specialists
And
here.
does it go without saying why it's in April?
It will tell us why you.
Well, there's two reasons in my mind. Number one, STS-1.
Absolutely.
Duh.
April 12th,
April 12,
1981.
1981. But specifically for me, April 12th, 1985 was the launch date of my second flight.
That's right. That's right. As I consult the scroll here, we're going to look at your flights right here. There are your missions there, and your 51D, your second flight, April 12th on Discovery. See my shuttle scroll here, Charlie. That was the fourth flight of Discovery. Telsat and Syncom. The shuttle, quick 6 days up, or 7 days actually.
Well, it was originally scheduled for 6, but we had a problem with that Syncom, which stretched us out. almost stretched us out, but it was a weather delay for landing here at the Cape that created the extra day in actuality anyway.
You flew with some awesome astronauts I don't think you flew with anybody twice, did you?
Did not.
But you had some big crews there, 6 and 7 and
5
yeah,
5 NASA astronauts.
Yeah.
In my second flight, there was another payload specialist, as there was a second payload specialist on my third flight.
And flying in the just April to December, you are one of the quickest to go to space, interval wise.
Nobody can argue when I say I'm the most frequent flyer. Not the most number of times, but I flew 3 flights within 15 months.
Yeah,
over a 15-month period.
Yes, there you go. And I've heard you say that we're going to talk about that, but you were really only thought you'd go to space one time as a mission specialist.
And in the beginning, NASA only thought I'd go to space one time.
Okay.
So yeah, as a payload specialist. Because in the beginning of the NASA organizing and approving, training and approving the payload specialist category of Space Shuttle crew member, it was the Space Lab payload specialists who were researchers very specific for their area of technology or science. And there might only be one Space Lab mission that was going to have their work on board. And so it was just probably going to be one flight for these Space Lab payload specialists as they were assigned, their Space Lab experiments were assigned manifest. And NASA just carried that attitude forward when I started the short string, as it was, turned out, of non-Space Lab other payload specialists, beginning with the industrial private payload specialist, myself from private industry, and there were a couple of others who NASA agreed to fly because they were associated with satellite payloads. And but NASA at the time, remembering this was before the ISS, what became the ISS as a space station, was approved, and so NASA had to fly something, and they went into the commercial business to launch satellites. And they wanted satellite customers to come and pay the National Treasury to fly aboard Space Shuttle. Mm-hmm. And to sweeten the pot, NASA was offering seats as payload specialists for somebody that the satellite owner and or manufacturer wanted to have fly. So there was that additional wrinkle in the payload specialist story after my selection and approval. And then there were other categories of payload specialists too, but we were a different breed from NASA thought of us as a different breed from the career astronauts. Mm-hmm. For quite some time. That didn't really change until after Challenger and into the 1990s, when a bunch of heads at NASA headquarters, but more especially at Johnson Space Center, said this segregation of payload specialists from the other flight crew members doesn't make any sense from a training standpoint, from a safety standpoint, and so we're going to give them seats finally in the astronaut office desks there. Instead of keeping them across the quadrant at Johnson Space Center in a completely different building.
Yeah, the mission specialists, Charlie's saying, didn't even have a desk at the
payload specialist
in the astronaut headquarters there in Johnson Space Center.
At Johnson Space Center, did not have desks in the astronaut office, had a separate building.
But these were the growing pains of the space transportation system,
Yep.
Where you had to have the pilots and the commanders. Of course, there's no co-pilot. The commander was really the pilot, flew the thing. And then people coming on to deploy these satellites, like Greg Jarvis,
or do other research involved,
and then getting the research involved in there. So we're going to talk about his 3 missions a little more in depth here with astronaut Charlie Walker. But you've given a lot of talks the last 25, 30 years since you did retire. There you are out at the Space Center the other day. We can tell that you really enjoy it. And you said a couple things that first tell us where you grew up, how you got motivated to go to space.
Well, I'll boldly declare that I'm 75 years old this year, which means I grew up with the space age. I was 9 years old when Sputnik was launched by the Soviet Union. I was 9.5 years old when Explorer 1 was launched right here from Cape Canaveral, USA. So I grew up with the space age, and I was becoming a young adult at the same time that the space age was growing out of science fiction into science reality. And I was absolutely enamored with it. And probably my interest in it seriously began with Walt Disney specials in
Oh wow,
1955,
yeah, Wonderful World of
1956,
Disney.
and then teachers with the impetus of a Soviet satellite in orbit around the Earth, Sputnik, were inspired to teach students more math, more science, and I gobbled that up. And my parents were very supportive in all of that in a number of ways we don't have time to go into, but I really got fired up at that point in time and knew I wanted to become an engineer, especially when comes 1958 and just a year after the first American satellite, nearly a year after the first American satellite was launched, when NASA got approval to send an American into space, into orbit, and had to have an astronaut corps to do it. And so the first selection of astronauts, 7 Mercury astronauts, one of them, turns out, grew up 12 miles from my hometown. And Gus Grissom was a local hero. And I decided, my family knew him. I never had a chance to meet him, sadly, but my family knew him. And in the years gone by, I got to know members of his family. He became a role model for me. I mean, I thought
Did he really?
if that Hoosier boy can do it, then this one can too. So now I didn't want to become a test pilot, combat fire. I didn't want to spend my adult life flying airplanes, hoping to get a chance to go fly a spaceship. My direction was, well, I will think about that maybe whenever space travel gets more common, which it was announced that it would be when NASA was approved to build a space shuttle, design and build a space shuttle. That effort starting in the early 1970s. That's when I really decided I'm going to try to find an opportunity to go fly, whether it's part of the astronaut corps or whether it's as a scientist or an engineer that gets a chance.
Now, Gus grew up in Mitchell, Indiana. You grew up where?
Bedford, Indiana.
Bedford, Indiana.
Yes.
So you got a school named after you there, or
No.
some streets or something up there?
No. I think there's an outhouse somewhere that's probably named after me, but I no, the town. These are folks that, like, they'll name something after a president of the United States. They'll name stuff after mayors of the city. I mean, people that really did something locally there. I guess I'm probably known for having left home, and I do go back.
And literally the earth from home, sure. Well, they ought to do. I mean, yes, that's kind of, we love. Like I said, and I was talking to Charlie about how American Space Museum is all about the space worker, and astronauts sometimes call the space workers their own hero. Here's my hero, Marty Winkel, running the board here. Worked for the Grumman Lunar Module, and then worked on your SSME engines that helped you out there into space.
Helped me out, got me there.
And awesome Midwestern roots there. We talked a little bit about it, that Charlie's his father took him out in the backyard as a young man to look at Mars. And what did he say to you about what could be happening on Mars?
My dad, who was a motion picture projectionist at the local theater houses, he watched the science fiction movies that he projected on the screen for the paying customers, and he was a veteran of World War II. He knew technology at a basic level, and he knew it was growing and expanding, and he was aware of astronomy, and the Mars fever of the early 1950s kind of inspired him to learn more about Mars. And come the close approach of Earth and Mars together in 1956 inspired him to to take me outside. Now, I'd already indicated, hey, this Walt Disney stuff with Von Braun and this Billy Lay and space travel going to the moon, this is really interesting stuff. Well, he came home one night after working at the theater and woke me up and said, come outside, Charles. I want to show you something. And I remember on the front lawn of our house, looking eastward, he said, follow my finger. He says, look at that that big red dot up there. That's the planet Mars. And he says, I want you to think about this. There might be a young person, a child on Mars looking back this way at you on this green planet, this green dot in their sky. Isn't that interesting? Well, it was interesting. I remember it vividly, and it just continued to inspire me both about space travel and space flight, but about astronomy as well.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Charlie. Just, yeah, to have that support of your family. And then, of course, in 1956, we didn't know until really 1965 that Mars was more of a dead world, and beings couldn't be living on it after Mariner 4 flew by there and showed craters and so forth. Right. I remember seeing that. I was a paper boy. And when I delivered that paper, I almost wanted to cry because we wanted to see forests and canals.
Me too. I remember seeing on the front page of the Bloomington, Indiana newspaper, one of the pictures, black and white, scans, rough image, but it definitely showed craters on the surface of Mars. And I remember a headline that said, "This picture was taken where Percival Lowell and others thought they saw a canal." But there's just a big hole in the ground there. It's a crater. Mars shows no evidence of canal. And I looked at that and read the caption, and my heart sank.
Yeah, me too. And there went the Percival Lowell that promoted the canals of Mars. We've talked about him being as popular as Stephen Hawking at the turn of the century there with the books that he wrote there. We're enjoying a conversation here with astronaut Charlie Walker. 3 space flights. He, for almost 20 years, has been out at the astronaut encounters there. Nick Thomas and Mark Smith, the astronaut wranglers out there. We're going to have Nick on. He's on here frequently talking about space history with us. When I was out there, it was really cute to see you. I hadn't seen anybody autograph a cast for a while. And there's a little girl there that you'd already autographed her hat, and you don't see casts that much like you used to back in the day.
And that's true. And you don't see plaster casts that much anymore. So these new ones are a little bit harder to get to. I don't ask the kids. I don't ask anyone. Do you want me to autograph that? I ask them, what do you want me to sign, if anything, or do you just want a photograph taken? And they'll come up with these things.
Are you amazed at how many people want your autograph? I mean, I'm not saying amazed in a surprise thing, but you just spent 4 days out there, twice, 2 autograph sessions a day. They really work them out there, I'll tell you. It's I really respect the astronauts putting your time in there to talk to the public. But hundreds of astronauts autographs every day, and we love it that you do.
Mark, I'm going to say I'm gratified by the number of people that come by asking for a photograph or an autograph. I mean, these folks have already decided that space is something interesting because they're paying the toll to come in to the visitor center, and they're already interested in space. But still, I'm gratified that, gosh, they're also a little bit, I don't want to say gobsmacked or ooh-ahs at the astronaut, but I get that kind of impression that, I mean, some of them have said they never thought they would get to meet someone who went to space.
Yeah.
And I recognize that because once upon a time, I never thought I would get to meet somebody that went to space.
Right.
And least of all, at once upon a time, I didn't think I would get to go to space. I mean, it was only after focused determination at education and then work experience and actively seeking explicit opportunity that might afford a launch to space to do real work out there did it happen. So it was hard work to get to it, and I just didn't know it was going to happen until it happened virtually. So I'm gratified to see people interested and wanting to hear more about the experience. And I find it, quite frankly, if you'll let me go on for just another second.
Of course.
I told a group today that I found it. I've come to the opinion, the personal opinion and perspective that this is a mission of sorts for me. And I think I haven't expressly spoken to other space flyers about it, but I think probably there are others that feel the same way, that it's a way to give back. It's a mission to, there's a mission that should take place, and those of us who have actually left this earth and come back and are able to talk about it to carry the word out there as to what it's about, even in rudimentary form, but to catch their attention and say, this is real, this is important stuff for the human race, for this country to be doing. And I had these experiences and these insights, and I want to share them with you, and hopefully you will be, if not excited, then certainly interested and remain interested in not only finding out more about our space programs, but supporting them as well. So,
Well, you do an excellent job, Charlie Walker. We've talking to the groups, very personal. He recounts a lot of interesting stories. Of course, most astronauts take you through the whole experience. We're going to talk about one of your pucker up experiences, so to speak, that you had there. But we talk all the time, Charlie Walker, about 594 humans have orbited the Earth in the last 62 years. Just 594. And you're one of them. And you did it 3 times. This is not tickets punched, but individuals gone to space. And yes, when we're in the business like we are, it's hard to sometimes kind of step away and think like, it's not that you're so unique, but you are. And 594, us baby boomers, we thought there'd be thousands of people orbited the Earth by now, but
number of human beings that have left this planet have experienced an extended reality, not a different reality, but an extended reality beyond the 3-dimensional Earth here, to go into expanded 3-dimensional space, even maybe 4 dimensions when you consider the time factor, and come back and talk about that as an experience, because technology, as this image that's behind us indicates, we have rocket technology that's carrying us into space almost on an on-demand basis. It's still expensive as dickens, and it is still risky. Riding millions of pounds of high explosive into outer space, away from the perceived pull of gravity, although physics professors out there will want me to immediately add, you're still under the influence of gravity when you're orbit. Your velocity is just right to balance against gravity. All the same, you perceive on board that you've left gravity, and that's a totally new experience, both for each individual physiological body, but for the psychology of those who fly to space. And it's interesting to folks to relate. So I'm happy to do that. And it's going to be an ongoing circumstance in the evolution of the human race, because the human race will soon be a multi-world species. And it's significant. I told them, let me just extend one more time to say, I traveled here to Titusville first time in 1969, on July 15th, 1969.
For the big launch.
Myself and 4 other Purdue students just literally decided on a whim, early in the week when NASA announced we've settled on this launch date, the crew's gone into quarantine. We decided to drive down here from Indiana. We drove straight through. One of the guys, he got his dad's car and got the loan of his family's pop-up camper. We parked at where the Kennedy Marina and condos are right now,
Right.
just south of Cheney, US or State Road 50.
Yep.
And along with, I don't know, hundreds of our new closest friends at that site. And we watched the liftoff, and we immediately got back in the car and drove back to watch television coverage of the remainder of the flight
Wow.
back home. But my interest started then with a focus, really focused, and I was a junior at Purdue University, so that just inspired me more and more to finish and to go on beyond that with more education, to keep learning and to better myself in order to get a chance to design the future rockets that would go to Mars, I hoped, and we all thought maybe by 1982. Of course, the Congress of the United States and the White House didn't want to do that, sad to say. But found a way to participate myself in what became the Space Shuttle program. At any rate, I was introduced to Titusville
Oh, well,
way
that's
back
neat.
then.
Yeah, Mr. Von Braun there, he would have had us on Mars in 1985 if he could have had his way, and according to those wonderful Walt Disney series of things he did there. Want to remind you of a couple of things that you said to some of the groups that I've heard you talk about. One is this quote: "If you weren't an environmentalist when you left this earth, when you came home, you surely were."
That was expressly in reference to that thin blue line that's visible in every photograph and video taken of the Earth looking toward the edge or the limb, as it's called, of the Earth, the horizon. There's a thin blue line there against contrasted against certainly the vital blue, green, and white of the Earth, the body of the Earth, but certainly also against the infinitely black abyss of deep space. And it's thin. It's I mean, if one were to do a ratio, if the Earth were as large, if an apple were as large as the Earth, the skin of the apple would be something like 10 times thicker
Wow.
than that thin blue line is around the Earth. And you intellectually know that this is all that keeps us alive. This is the Earth's life support system. And so my comment.
To see that 17 times a day, your sunrises and sunsets and that thin blue line. I wanted to show this picture here of Charlie. There's a throwback picture of you. This is actually a press release that we can enlarge that, Marty, there. This is the way press releases were. Photo caption from McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, P.O. Box 516, St. Louis, Missouri. They would send this to newspapers around the world, the country. Payload specialist Charles D. Walker is shown injecting an air bubble into the sample pump of the company's electrophoresis device. By measuring the bubble's rate of progress within the separation column, he can calculate the sample flow rate. Walker will calibrate the pump at frequent intervals throughout the 7-day mission. This is why you went to space, sir, the electrophoresis device there. And I'm going to have, as I show you your first crew here, one comment that I love that you made was, nobody goes to space alone. Team playing is very important. And so tell us a little bit about this machine that you took to space and pioneered there, and your experience with this wonderful crew.
Well, very quickly, the objective of the project, which the company McDonnell Douglas Corporation and pharmaceutical company partners with us at the time, the objective was to create purer medical materials, both research and pharmaceuticals, medicine grade materials, create purer concoctions of various proteins, hormones, and enzymes for, again, research and for therapies and treatments as medicines, by taking the impure mixes, which all pharmaceuticals start out from, usually from colonies of cells being stimulated to grow as they do in the body, but in containers outside the body where the fluid that they exude as they grow, which contains hormones, enzymes, that fluid is taken off and then through electromechanical devices is purified. But those devices in the biotechnical processes are all affected by gravity. The influence of gravity disturbs the processes, and they're not 100% efficient by any way or means, nor are they allowing pure preparations to be formed. So leave gravity behind, and the theory says you can make perfectly pure pharmaceuticals if you didn't have the disturbing effects of gravity. That was the theory. That was the equipment that I helped design and that I flew and operated in space as the chief test engineer of the project and the guy that knew how to do what that photograph was showing better than anybody else. And NASA accepted the statement of and the fact that we were investing millions of dollars of our own money in this pursuit as a prospective commercial business, which as one element in the business, the transportation element and the location for processing to purity being space, NASA accepted the challenge to let us do this in the first partnership arrangement of its kind, not a contractor arrangement, but a partnership arrangement wherein we invested our own money, but NASA would fly the hardware until such time as we might be producing materials for sale, at which time we would then reimburse the National Treasury for the transportation costs. The quid pro quo was that NASA would get research opportunity time, some hours of time in the operation of the device while it's on orbit, which they did for all the flights that we had. So this was the premise. And the machine was called the Continuous Flow Electrophoresis device. That's a process, an electrochemical process that is standard use in laboratories and many purification plants for pharmaceuticals here on Earth. But again, take that process away from the Earth and the limitations that gravity imposes are gone. And it's a much more efficient process. And we did demonstrate that successfully.
And there's your crew of 51 or 41D. 41D. There, you're rocking a mustache in those early days there.
I grew that mustache my last year at college because I kept getting tagged by other students as, "You look too young to be here."
Oh, really?
What year of grade school did you get to qualified to come to Purdue, et cetera, et cetera? So I grew it to grow older. Well, by 1984, I guess it was early 1984 when this picture was taken. That was 12, 14 years later. It had worked. I was older. So I decided to take it off for my other flights. Now, that's in actuality, I'll be honest here, that's the semi-humorous answer, which is partly true. But the real reason I took it off was that after my first flight, after this first flight with this crew, was that I knew I was going to have photographs taken in space of me with the device on the second flight, which when I finished this flight, NASA went ahead and approved the request for that second flight. And if I had photographs taken of the second flight with me with a mustache, I wouldn't probably be able to tell which flight I was on. And I wanted to tell the difference between the photographs.
That's good. There you go. Yeah, that's a good way to do it there. Don't want to shave your head. It wasn't in style back then, right?
Nope.
So what an amazing crew, Charlie. One veteran, okay, and the rest rookies. I'm not sure we've ever done that before. Henry Hartsfeld, his second flight. Mike Coates is the pilot. Stephen Hawley, first 4 or 5 flights for him. Judy Resnick, of course, her only flight. Mike Mullane's flown, I think, 4 times after this, and then you're first of 3. Comment about that. I find that unusual that all the rookies and the commander.
Remember, this was the 12th flight of the space shuttle,
Yeah.
so there wasn't that much opportunity for inaugural flights and the creation of veteran shuttle flown astronauts. So actually, the couple of flights before this one, this was the first crew with 6. I think maybe the second crew was 6. And the other previous flights had one veteran as the commander and the other rookies. So NASA was in the process of, with their professional astronaut corps, creating veterans that then could staff future flights. More and more of future crews would be veterans in spaceflight experience, which of course just added to the efficiency of the mission and reduced the risk for, well, in the aviation business we'd say cockpit error, because you just weren't quite comfortable with where you were working yet. So things got more and more experienced as time went on. But this was a very interesting crew. This NASA crew had been assigned and trained together for a year and a half by the time we got on the launch pad with a scheduled launch date, first one in June of 1984. And by that time, this crew had been working together, and they were a family. They were a team of close-knit individuals working very efficiently together. And God bless them, they invited me to come in and allowed me to join in the festivities. And I was extremely pleased at their agreeability and their comfort with me as another rookie like them, but without the more extensive training that mission specialists with NASA or pilots certainly have before a space flight. So it was fun.
Well, there's one famous picture of you all in orbit, of course, there that you've got a little story to tell about this. We love the in-flight pictures of the crew. They always take one in there. And there's Judy floating away.
Not quite all the way. Of course, there's a ceiling there. And it's,
yeah, right.
But yes, floating out of the group. This is not the first in-flight crew photo that we took this day at this session. The first one was the entire crew tucked in there, floating close together, but tucked in generally together in front of, in fact, the electrophoresis device that it was accompanying me, or I was accompanying it, as it would say.
You're right.
But this was not the first picture. The first picture was us tightly tucked in. Judy insisted on there being a second picture taken. She just said that. And Mike Coates, the pilot who's there in the lower right-hand corner of the picture, closest to the camera was a still camera, a Hasselblad, but it had a little mechanical spring timer that you set on the shutter to release the shutter after 10 seconds. So Mike would set that at 10 seconds. The camera, of course, was on a post attached to the wall, so it was static. And he would set that timer, and then he would float back into position there. Well, when he did that for the second photo that Hank said, go ahead and take that second photo, Judy floated up out of the group, as you see here, and the picture was snapped. And you see us all smiling there, and some of us a little more actively than others, because we all knew what was going on. Judy's floating up there, but we didn't know why. But we're taking a picture, so we're all going to smile, and we felt a little be humored by her action. And after the picture snapped, everybody turned to Judith and asked, Judy, what's going on? And she boldly stated to the rest of us, guys, you have no ways of knowing this, but my legs have never looked better than they do here in weightlessness, and I've got to have a picture.
That's cool.
And then PAO saw this back on the ground, and it was a unique, from that standpoint, just a person separate from, slightly separate from the other crew, and attractive lady at that. And so Public Affairs Office said, that's the picture we're going to use. The crew, except for Judy, kind of disagreed, but Public Affairs Office will publish what they want to publish.
And you see it in a lot of books and so forth in there. So, that's a great memory there. And what a nice story that you're only going to hear here on Stay Curious. We're enjoying Charlie Walker here. We're going to talk some more about his other missions. Let me do this. I wanted to say that Charlie, you've told to the group before that quote, I died 100 times before I went to space, unquote. And this is of course talking about simulators.
This is stressing the importance of training for every astronaut and every crew of astronauts, be they professional astronauts or include a private or itinerant astronaut like myself. Training, absolutely important, and part of the suite of training activities includes simulator training, and there are simulator facilities, rooms that are configured like the inside of the spaceship that you're going to be launching in, and or today the space station living and working in for long periods of time. But the simulators here on the ground are in buildings where just down the hallway from the simulator facility is a control room with several engineers and technicians who have been tasked to be very devious about their job. Because they, in fact, control every switch and every computer and display within that simulator, which to the casual eye looks like just like the inside of whatever you're simulating, the flight deck on the space shuttle or otherwise. But those people control the actions and the responses of those electromechanical devices. And so you go in there, and you know this, you go in there programmed for a launch simulation. So you go in, you go through the countdown, simulated countdown, the preparation for launch, and because it's such a great training exercise, sometime, in fact, the Mission Control Center is tied in with the simulation, and they're part of the training exercise. They need to be trained too, obviously. And sometimes the Launch Control Center down here at KSC is tied in electronically. You go through, you start into the simulation, and usually almost immediately something will happen that's a problem, that would be a problem in flight. Like this whole switch panel shorts out, or that computer dies, or you're handed a message which says your RCS thruster combo set 3 is malfunctioning on, and you're about to go spinning out of control. The point being, what the heck do you do about it? You're flying this mission, simulated mission, but you're flying a mission. Now, how do you fix that? How do you either correct that instantly to get back into normal mission mode, or if it's something truly critical, how do you save your life, your crew's life, and hopefully even save the mission? And you are tasked with problem solving. That's when I said, as I didn't come up with it, but I heard it from others around the astronaut office, I died 100 times before I went to space. Meaning it'll take you to a death, and you can crash a space shuttle in the simulator and then get out of there a little disgusted with yourself, go home, kiss the family, have dinner, sleep a good night's sleep, get up the next morning, drive to the Space Center and back in the simulator, and you try it again. Do you get it right?
Well, that begs to ask the question here on Flight 41D, the 12th mission of a shuttle, was the drama of the first pad abort. At 8:43 a.m., the countdown was going flawlessly at T-minus 6.6 seconds on June 26, 1984. That's a day of infamy for you, I'm sure. They lit the 3 main engines, and number 3 at the top didn't work just right, and everything was shut down after about 2 seconds of firing. Flame, smoke, and steam resulted from the aborted launch attempt. And there you and your crewmates are what they call swinging back on that twang back and forth. So, Charlie, how much preparation was there for this? Did they ever throw that at you in the sims? And tell us about the pucker factor on that morning.
I don't remember that's as a simulated problem ever being posed, certainly while I was part of the sim. But I was just a passenger on board during launch and during ascent. So I did not need to be and was not a part of every simulated launch in the simulator training activities in Houston. The crew might have gotten this, but the indication I got the day it happened was, oh my God, let's think hard here. What is an RSLS launch abort? So I don't think it happened in the simulators here, but thank God it had been simulated locally with the launch controllers here any number of times. And of course, I say of course, the programmers of both the ground-based computer systems guiding the various on-pad system safety systems, like the fire quenching and extinguishing system on the pad, were programmed to accommodate an on-pad launch abort. And you were right, Mark, in that this was the first on-pad launch abort in the Space Shuttle program, but it was the second in the U.S. space program. Gemini Titan 6 had this happen back in the mid-60s with a Titan launch vehicle. But this was the first shuttle. The mid-60s was 15, 16 years before this. The launch controllers were all basically, most of them, different people. So it was there was a high pucker factor, as they say in the aviation business, in the cockpit that day. We figuring out what's going on, hearing from launch control what the assessment was. There's those arrows indicate where there was a water quenching, putting out a fire that was visible because it was burning insulation on the rear rudder and body flap of the orbiter. The fire was a hydrogen oxygen fire from the liquid propellant that had gone unburned and dumped through some engines onto the launch pad and into the flame trench. So it was an invisible fire to start with, and only made visible after a minute or so of burning, because it was burning insulation, which created an orange flame. So literally there was a fire for a period of time. It wasn't a massive fire, but it was a small fire down there. Thank goodness, of course, the structure of the space shuttle is made to withstand high temperatures, and so it did not significantly damage. They had to replace some insulation and some gap fillers back there for tiles. But the real problem was finding the cause in the engine that the computers had diagnosed as misfiring or failing to operate correctly, and then replacing that engine and getting some qualified approval for the fact that these engines would be okay as a whole to launch attempt. And so that was decided. We went into training again within a couple of weeks after this. Of course, we all took a week off after this to get our heads straight and relax a little bit from the tension of the time. And we launched successfully then in August of that year.
What was the leadership of Commander Hartsfield like during this? Master alarms going on,
Rock
right?
solid. Master alarms going on. The launch control flight director is telling us, the crew, really specifically focused on Coates and Hartsfield, the pilot and the command pilot, as to what they saw down here. We didn't have as much instrumentation on board. Hank and Mike Coates didn't have as much instrumentation up on the flight deck as, of course, the launch controllers at Launch Control Center had. So there was some very intense and succinct communication back and forth, but very readily the launch controllers knew to tell us, we're seeing the tank pressures go down. That's important. You don't want a tank to overpressurize and potentially pop. We've inerted all the engines and the rockets, which means the 3 liquid fuel rocket engines and the 2 solid propellant rockets. And for those of you that don't recognize immediately what that means, is solid propellant rockets. They're like these SRBs are giant 4th of July solid fuel rockets. You light the fuse,
yeah.
You light them, you light the propellant. There's no stopping them. They're going somewhere, and you want to be absolutely clear and clean that you're ready to go before you light them. So it was a good thing to hear that they're inerted. And that made us feel a lot safer. Then we heard about the fire and got a little tense for a few seconds. I did anyway, until they said, well, the launch quench system, on-pad quench system has put out the fire, as we can see. NASA wasn't really prepared at the time, as I remember it, to identify with infrared heat sensors on the pad to identify an invisible fire that is invisible to the naked eye, a hydrogen fire. They put those sensors in right away before the August launch of our mission that year, and of course they're on the pad ever since. So it was a tense time for a bit. Then, of course, the launch control, we waited. Hank was very, very solid in that, and there is a procedure. There was a procedure on board Space Shuttle for what is called emergency egress. It's actually called Mode 1 egress, if anybody wants to look through the flight data files for emergency procedures. And there's cue card. There's a cue card up on the flight deck. There's a cue card on my mid-deck, and I'm one of 2 people in the mid-deck. Judy Resnick was in the mid-deck with me. She was over by the hatch. It would have been her responsibility to crank that hatch open and pop it open for us to get out if Henry said, bail out, bail out, bail out, which he didn't, because he was getting indications that satisfied him that the systems were safing safely, and that certainly, given verification that the launch support team would be out to get us out of there, we just had to wait, and we waited something like 30 minutes. But I was, as soon as I heard RSLS abort, I looked up at the overhead, that the lockers, which were overhead in gravity mode, were sitting on the launch pad, so my feet are in the air, my head is back flat against a hard seat. And I was looking up at a cue card for Mode 1 egress because I was fully believing in my own mind for a few seconds that we're going to be told to get out of here real quick, run across the ramp that got us into the orbiter, over to the slide wire baskets, which would take us to bunkers, which were all part of the original Apollo launch pad structure. And were reconfigured for the space shuttle, but there was the same kind of escape mode on the launch pad as the Apollo astronauts would have, should have, could have utilized if any incident like this might have happened during Saturn V Apollo launches. Never did, of course, and never did during shuttle, but almost this first time. But no, Henry was solid. The information that came from the launch team was solid and quick, and we readily knew, at least the NASA team knew that, or NASA astronaut team knew that they were safing faster. I think I remained nervous with a high heart rate for a little longer than they did.
What a story there, taking you inside the cabin of Orbital Vehicle 103, the famous discovery there. Have you seen that ship at Udvar-Hazy?
Oh, I've been there many times. I haven't been there since COVID locked us out, but back up there numerous times.
You were twice on Discovery, once on Atlantis, and you said to the audience the other day, always say hello to the grand lady when you come to
I went over this
Center.
afternoon to pay my regards after everybody had left. Security likes to sweep the public out of the grounds at the visitor complex as soon as possible after the complex closes down and shuts the gates for new entry. I had my flight blues on, and I said to security, I really want to go pay my respects to this lady that got me into space and back home again safely. And I got a sir, yes, sir out of security, no problem whatsoever. So I spent half an hour with her, and I think she still remembers me.
Well, that's cool, man. That's neat. She just, I've seen Discovery. I've not seen Endeavor, but I mean Atlantis free in the sky there.
Right here, you guys.
It's just
beautiful. Folks here at Titusville, at the Space Coast, at Kennedy Space Center, have one extraordinary display. I think this is the most interesting and informative display of an orbiter that there is. And of course, there's only three orbiters.
Yeah.
Three orbiters that have actually flown to space on display here in the world and in the United States, of course. Outside Udvar-Hazy, or in Udvar-Hazy, outside of Washington, D.C., and out in the L.A. area for Endeavor. I think this is the most interesting display.
You got the two levels, Charlie. You're looking in the payload bay during the beautiful unveil, which is one of the greatest reveals of anything I've ever seen.
Eye-watering.
Hair raises on my arms every time I see it. But then when you're below it, looking, underneath the tiles, really sort of gives you how big it really is.
Yes, it does.
And Mike Leinbach's taught me that the black tiles are the ones they replaced there, Mark, and he says 90% of the original tile are still on Atlantis.
I hadn't heard that, but I totally believe
Mike,
it, of course. And
Launch Director Mike Leinbach. Well, we're really enjoying a great time here with Charlie Walker. We've talked about how he's given it back after he had 3 flights to space within 18 months, and in 84 and 85. And here's your second one, Charlie, with the crew that
Bo Bobko led this crew, designated 51D. It had been different crew numbers. In fact, this crew was assigned to a mission in the records for a few months as 41D, and then they were 51E, and different payload specialists for that assigned mission. And then because of an accident, a slight accident down here in the orbiter processing facility, in which the orbiter that they were going to fly on, Challenger, was dinged. Part of the one of the cargo bay doors was dinged by a platform, and oops, it was going to take a little time to repair it. NASA didn't want to delay the flight schedule, so they shifted that crew to Discovery, to the orbiter Discovery. my equipment was already in Discovery, and for a slightly later launch date flight, and we were surprised to get a phone call from Johnson Space Center saying, we've shifted the orbiter designation for this next flight crew to your orbiter, and we're not going to spend the money to take your equipment out of there. So that means you have to fly with this crew, Walker.
Oh, wow.
So there I am with
And there was an astronaut named Baudry that was scheduled with this crew.
Patrick Baudry was scheduled to fly with them. He had trained with the crew, the NASA crew, the 5 NASA astronauts, and with the other payload specialist and congressional observer by his own titular designation. He titled himself a congressional observer. And that was Jake Garn, senator from Utah, who just happened to be the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Money Committee that oversaw the NASA budget. It just happened to be.
Yeah, right. I'll fly.
Mhm.
Check this out.
Well, let me not leave any. There's no reason to besmirch Jake.
Right.
Jake had an aviation heritage that went back to his father in the teens in Salt Lake City. His
Wow.
father was the first individual to get a pilot's license in the state of Utah. And Jake learned at his knee. Jake went into uniform reserve service, became an aviator. By the time Jake flew as an observer, congressional observer with this NASA mission, he had some several thousand hours of aircraft flight time, and I forget how many different aircraft, and even some command pilot time. So Jake knew aviation, and he knew the discipline of this, and he was an absolutely perfect crew member.
You actually, and I would like for you to dispel that he did have space sickness up there, and I think that you say that was overplayed in his case.
Jake acknowledged this after he came back. Jake was a consummate politician, and he knew that the word would get out that he had some space motion sickness issues in orbit. So he came back, and he was absolutely open with it. He says, yeah, I felt sick up there for 3 days. But there I was, one of the crew members, observing Jake and assisting him in keeping himself stable, physically not moving very much so that he didn't get disrupted, because any of us that have been motion sick know that, boy,
Right.
the more you move your head around, the worse it gets. Because the body has only so many ways to display its dissatisfaction with any physical or perceived physical condition. So things like vomiting, things like stomach upsets, things like cold sweats, malaise, typical. And Jake was acknowledged that, yeah, he had all of those, but he did have them at a severity level that was probably about the most that had been experienced by folks before that time. But again, to give credit as credit is in fact due to Jake, yeah, he had all this experience, this aviation experience. He even had shipboard time as a naval aviator in the reserves. So he told us, and I fully believe him, he says, I'd never been seasick. I've never been car sick. I've never been aviation sick. I did not know what was going on with me. And so he felt extra bad because he'd never experienced these symptoms before. But again, to give full credit here, NASA docs, even to this day, flight doctors to this day will admit we cannot predict who will be space motion sick and who will not. If you're motion sick on the ground, you've still got a 50-50 chance of not being space sick when you get there. If you have never experienced space sickness or motion sickness on Earth, there's every chance, if you have experienced it on Earth, there's every chance you won't when you get to space. So it just was a set of interesting circumstances. But let me finish that story by adding again something that Jake has said public, which is, and I verify this, that the symptoms went away within literally an hour or two's time after 3 days, after 72 hours. At the end of 72 hours, he was saying, I feel better. No, I feel great. Give me some food, give me some water, I can keep it down, no stomach upset. Sure enough, he did, and to his credit, Jake later said to the crew, he said, I've never felt so bad in my life as I did those first 3 days. But he said, I'll tell you what, he says, the experience of continued weightlessness and and the joy that it brings to a person, I would go through all that again to experience weightlessness one more time.
What a great story, Charlie Walker, and that dispels some of the myths that we love dispelling here on Stay Curious. Right from the source there. Hope Jake Garn's doing good out there. Know he's getting pretty long in the tooth. But this mission of 51D was the fly swatter mission, and you're going to tell us a little bit about how this was the intent of our space truck was going to take 2 satellites up, make a bunch of money, do a little science, and then come back down. And we'd keep doing that and just fill those national coffers with all these space companies. They were so arrogant that they said, forget your single stick rockets. Everyone's going to want to fly on the shuttle. Well, you had a little problem with one of the satellites there. You're going to tell us about that.
Well, you say arrogance. It was a national policy. This was federal bureaucracy saying, we invested all this in a reusable space transportation system for the country. All you expendable rockets go away. We've got to pay for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was federal policy. It was imposed upon NASA. But that satellite, one of 2, SYNCOM by name, a commercially built satellite, but it was to be owned by the U.S. Navy, operated by the U.S. Navy Communications. And the satellite rolled out as planned of the cargo compartment, but it failed to deploy its antennas. That would have been the definitive sign that it had turned on, and it was proceeding to, in its own internal countdown, to fire its internal rocket engine to boost it up to 22,300 miles permanent orbit. It didn't turn on. It never unfurled its antennas. And so after literally 5 minutes, we could tell something's wrong. We radioed to the ground, Houston, we don't see the satellite deploying. And Houston says, the manufacturer and the owner say they don't hear any radio from it, which they should be getting telemetry back, information radioed back. Right away, they was like, well, the satellite's not working. How can we fix it? Our crew absolutely did not want our image on return to be, marred by the fact that we had to leave a multi-tens of $million satellite in low Earth orbit as space junk. So we insisted on working out some way to figure out what could be done to fix the satellite. Well, the manufacturer said, if you look on the outside of that, and the crew knew this very well, where the initiation switch was. There was a switch in a small gray area on the side of this 14-foot long, 14-foot wide satellite. And inside that square was a switch that literally was crooked like your forefinger and about as big as your forefinger. And the satellite, as it was stowed in the shuttle, as it rolled out on springs, was pushed and rolled because it went into gyroscopic motion to stabilize itself. As it rolled out, that switch was to click closed and turn the satellite on. Start the internal software, hardwired procedures to start the initiation procedures toward launching itself into higher orbit. Turn it on. The manufacturer rated it up and said, all we could figure out that switch didn't click. So they said, we want to see if you can click that switch. We were told, do that with tools. So we made tools from spare parts on board. Tools from the tools then would be added to the remote manipulator end. And if I can move my finger in this image to right there on the end of the remote manipulator arm, this is the business end of the Canadian provided RMS, remote manipulator system. There are some odd shaped gray tools there. One of them was called the fly swatter because it looked like a fly swatter. They were made from spare parts on board with some basic thoughts from launch control, mission control here on Earth, but us taking spare parts from procedure book covers, extra wiring that wasn't needed on board, and a couple of aluminum rods that were used to throw switches overhead on the flight deck and overhead panels during ascent, during launch, all put together by duct tape.
Of course.
And we didn't even know duct tape was on board until the ground radioed up and said, here's the parts we recommend you use to put together these tools. Duct tape. And duct tape? Where's duct tape? We didn't know duct tape was on board. But people had found cubbies for all kinds of spare stuff in the behind the lockers in the middle deck. And anyway, we put it all together. 2 of the crew members went out on the first unscheduled spacewalk in the American program. Dave Griggs and Jeffrey Hoffman.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff went on, of course, after this. He became a Mr. EVA expert. And Jeff was one of the 2, along with Story Musgrave, that led the first recovery of and repair of the Hubble Space Telescope, and went on to do other EVAs. Anyway, so those tools were installed on that arm, and then Ray Seddon, one of the crew members who was a surgeon before she became a NASA astronaut, deftly maneuvered the tool up against the satellite. The flight crew pilots, Bob Coe, commander, and Don Williams, pilot, flew the shuttle up against that satellite. It was, of course, out there in its own orbit, and we flew up near to it, 60 feet or so from it. This was not the safest maneuver because, again, the satellite didn't look like it was doing anything, but nobody knew if that rocket motor on board had been armed to fire and might, for any particular reason, like the throw of a switch, go off. So it wasn't a totally risk-free maneuver, but the risk was deemed to be worth taking, and the manufacturer said, no, it'll be all right. Well, it was all right. The switch was hit 3 times in succession by this rotating satellite, rotating the switch past the fly swatter tool and catching 3 times. Satellite still didn't turn on.
Work.
But the manufacturer radioed up that the crew should not be as blue as they knew we were, because didn't work, and we were a little down on that, until the manufacturer radioed up and said, you guys, you got to realize this. You are the only troubleshooting team that would ever see this satellite. And with your troubleshooting, you have successfully determined what the problem is. It's not the switch, and it's not something that we can fix with your mission, but because of your mission, we can put together a black box with the electronics inside the switch, which we now recognize as having failed. Well, they did build a black box. The next shuttle flight rendezvoused with the satellite some months later. An EVA connected the black box through some test ports on the outside of the satellite, and that crew initiated the black box. It, of course, was on a timer, to giving them time to get back in the shuttle, get the shuttle away from the satellite. Antennas unfurled. The satellite started its sequence of launched itself into higher orbit, went to work for 12 years, and saved the country $75 million.
That's and I love that story, that there's a positive negative sort of come out of that. That your fix didn't work, but that was all right. They knew that there was this in there.
The fix didn't fix it, but the troubleshooting worked to find out what the problem really was.
Well, 7 months later, Charlie Walker is strapped on the space shuttle again, strapped inside of it, I guess, and headed to space with this crew of STS-61D in November 1985.
Correction, 61 Bravo, 61
Bravo.
B.
B. Boy, Bravo, boy. There you go. There's your, you got another Purdue nod up there, Jerry Ross. And tell us about this mission on Atlantis.
Well, I think I'm the one that started the timer on the camera in this picture. Again,
there you are.
It's a camera. This time we've got a nice wide-angle lens. NASA allowed us a nice wide-angle lens. Actually, a wide-angle lens because of an EVA spacewalks that the guy who's to my left in this picture, Woody Spring, and directly behind him in the back row is Jerry Ross, and they were the 2 EVA crew members who went outside to do some experimental work for NASA Langley Center, who had engineered some structural experiments looking at how structures could be assembled and moved around in the cold and vacuum and weightlessness of space. It was called ease access, and like everything else, all the letters that went to into the words ease access were words formed into an acronym, and I cannot remember what the word was.
Right.
But again, it was a structural assembly and mobility experiment, which they performed over 2 EVAs. And it was a very interesting mission, in addition to launching some satellites and the biochemical work that I did.
And
Oh, by the way, let me mention that also this included one of the very first international astronauts. I think, in fact, the third international astronaut to fly on board, the fourth international astronaut to fly on board an American space shuttle, behind Dr. Mary Cleave, who is there in the middle between Woody and myself, Woody Spring and myself. Behind her is Dr. Rodolfo Nerivella, Mexico's first astronaut in space.
and still their only astronaut to go to space, I believe.
Still their only native,
Yeah.
and citizen, native Mexican citizen, yes.
Well, we've enjoyed talking with Charlie Walker here. You've had an illustrious career. Actually, he flew with 17 different astronauts on your 3 missions. It never flew with anybody twice, but you always had a lot of fun. And part of the fun was picture day.
The crews brought me into the fun. The crews were all great teams. Humor is a very important part of space flight. As I think anyone who experiences risky or certainly situations that inspire anxiety, humor is just a natural human behavior to break tension and to relieve some of the tension and anxiety in a circumstance. And again, there's quite a bit of tension in space flight and even training for space flight. And these folks all know that very well, many of them from military aviation experience. And that's come together in the formation of those teams. They brought me in, and I was delighted to be a part of their teams.
What was the theme of this character?
The theme of this humorous photo was find some attire and display and wear some attire that represents some of your background, upbringing, experience that you bring to the space program and or specifically this mission. Obviously, Rodolfo Nerivella, a Mexican sombrero, and next to him is commander, to his right, the left in the photo, is the commander of the mission, and Brewster grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. So he's got a farmer's equipment firm ball cap there on. To their left is pilot of the mission, Brian O'Connor. And Brian was a naval aviator. And so there he is, goggles and leather jacket. And Mary Cleave in front of Brewster, the commander. Mary wearing a hard hat because she was a civil engineer by training, a sanitary civil engineer. Myself, they struggled. A lab coat. Okay, got to have a lab coat. But then anything else, what does a lab technician wear as a hat? Well, you don't. So I don't know. I got a bowler because somebody said, hey, you got to put some on your head. Well, over here in the prop department, there's a spare bowler. Put that on your head. And Woody and Jerry in their EMUs, their extravehicular mobility units, their EVA suits, obviously to demonstrate the primary, besides deployment of the commercial satellites, the primary NASA mission was to demonstrate those skills in assembly and moving in anticipation of building a space station in the near future with those kinds of techniques. And they're wearing hard hats because, hey, they were going to do construction, the highest high wire construction ever done. So there they are, and a lunch bucket. The Ace Trucking Company.
Ace Construction Company there, yeah. Hard hat missionary. Well, that's neat. Thank you for taking us all through that there. Did you have your 3 mission logos there? Did you have anything to do with designing them?
No.
Okay.
Those were done by the those were done by the crews before. Again, I flew once in 3 times in 15 months. Every one of the crews were organized as crew members, had assigned the missions, and early on when assigned a mission, you come up with your crew logo. So I just saluted and was very happy to have my name anywhere on
and well accepted into all 3 crews in there. Well, as we end our conversation with astronaut Charlie Walker here, there you are in space. You got your mustache, so that's 41D there, right?
First flight.
Yep, there you go.
You guessed it.
Where is your astronaut pin. Where do you keep your astronaut pin?
I don't keep it because I never received one.
Oh, you didn't? You never?
Payload specialists do not get NASA career astronaut pins.
Is that right?
Because that's what those pins are. They're career astronaut recognition by the agency.
Well, we didn't
Payload
know that,
specialists
Marty.
are not.
Thought everybody got a pin for going to.
No, not from
Can we
NASA.
help you get one?
Not from
Can we
NASA.
lobby for that?
I would love that you did, but I doubt that lobbying is going to change the
That's
history of the
interesting.
past 40 years. However, let me just add here, I and most all prior flown astronauts, and cosmonauts, and international astronauts are members of a 501c3. That's, for those that aren't aware, that's the IRS code for an educational, not-for-profit organization called the Association of Space Explorers. I will generically refer to it semi-humorously as the Civilian Astronaut Union. We're actually a public member, a membership organization, not public membership, but a membership organization for educational purposes of international astronauts and cosmonauts, intent on spreading the good news about human spaceflight and how it's benefiting humanity to understand itself from experiencing itself in a different environment and understand the environment of our home planet in a better way, in a more refined and focused way from observation from outside. And anyway, the ASE, the Association of Space Explorers, has come up with a pin for all space flyers, and it has two different configurations. One is a configuration mounted inside of a circle that indicates orbit. So those who orbit the Earth and are members get that pin. Those who just enter space for a short period of time and return to Earth in suborbital flights, as the New Shepard capsule, currently the only, besides Virgin Galactic's winged spaceship, way to get to the edge of space for a few minutes, and then come back to Earth. New Shepard and Virgin Galactic's spaceship have created the opportunity and provided the opportunity for some individuals to reach space for a few moments and then come back to Earth, and hey, they're in space. So our determination, astronauts' own determination, is they're astronauts. You have to say they are astronauts by the definition, the common and dictionary definition of the term. So we have a pin for those members. Again, the membership is those who have flown to space. You can't become a member unless you've gone to space.
Yeah.
But we have pins for suborbital members and pins for orbital members.
Yes, Marty and I've come up with the term Karmanauts for the suborbital astronauts that go above the Kármán line.
On Kármán line, yeah.
For the physicist Kármán, who actually started the Jet Propulsion Lab.
Yeah.
Many years ago.
Yep.
We've enjoyed having Charlie Walker here. One final question. In your beautiful home in Tucson, Arizona, what do you have on the wall that says Charlie Walker went to space?
In
other words, what's some of the cherished things, that mementos you may have?
Well, I've got I've got, first of all, NASA spaceflight awards. While Johnson Space Center doesn't give payload specialists, myself, a spaceflight pin, NASA headquarters has a spaceflight medal, which I've got framed on the wall there. I got various things. Maybe most memorable is behind my desk. I've got a poster board advert for myself giving a lecture on my space flight experience of 3 flights on the evening of January 27th, 1986.
Oh, wow.
In San Diego, at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. So I was in San Diego the morning of the 28th, ready to get on an airplane. And so I was remember being bodaciously bold about the prospects of continued shuttle flights, greater rate of flight, the activity that I was involved in becoming a commercial business, making better medicines for all of us using space. And the very next day, the loss of Challenger and one of my very dear friends, Judy, and they were all friends of mine on Challenger. Changed all of that, changed the world of space flight.
Certainly
even to this
did.
day.
Certainly did. And all those dreams of the space truck and so forth had to be reimagined, but they were. And,
Right.
And here's one of the true pioneers of our shuttle era here, Mr. Charlie Walker. I can't thank you enough for the time and
Thank you.
and the in-depth discussions that we've had. You're a very sharp, brilliant man, and in my opinion, has done a lot for the birth of our shuttle era that is now the fruition is this beautiful space station that for 22 years has been continuously occupied. Thanks to the hard work of mission specialists like you.
And I want to again thank you personally, but I want to thank the American Space Museum for the opportunity to get the word out in this fashion. You do good work, as Gus Grissom said.
Well, thank you, sir. That means a lot. We hope to have you back again your next visit here. When there will be, I'm sure Bruce Melnick's already twisted your arm for a few dates in there.
Actually, not quite. Bruce, I hope you're listening.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get Bruce in here. But again, thank you very much. This is really one of the great guys out there that's promoting his experiences in space. You're very humble about it, yet you're very succinct and knowledgeable in a way that I think everybody of all ages can understand what it's like to travel in space and how important it's been to America that we've done this. So thank you very much, sir. You have anything else I didn't ask you that you'd like to share with our Stay Curious audience?
Well, there's a heck of a lot you didn't ask me, but there'll just have to be future opportunities to share.
Yeah.
I just want to say, yes, I will say to those that choose to listen, thank you for your interest. Thank you for any support that you can give to this space museum or generally to the space program, like Write Your Congress Critter, about support of not only NASA, but commercial space flight regulation. Safe, it needs to happen, but be realistic about it and help make it happen. And Ad Astra.
Ad Astra. Well, thank you, Charlie Walker. What a phenomenal discussion we've had today with you. Thank you, Marty, for running a good Streamlabs here. And for all of you out there watching Stay Curious, please tell your friends to watch this wonderful program on YouTube channel. We make a little bit of money on YouTube, or watch it on Facebook. But tell your friends, because that's what we're all about. The American Space Museum is humbly reaching out to share stories with astronauts, space workers, and of course space history like no one else shares it, we feel, in the social media world. So until next time, I'm Mark Marquette on behalf of Mr. Charlie Walker here, saying we will see you again to bridge the space between us.
Adios. Live long and prosper.